on the NewsChannel 5 network. This is OpenLine.
Hello everyone, welcome to OpenLine. Thank you for being with us. Tennessee is executing inmates at an historic rate. Nicholas Sutton was executed last week. Just this week, dates have been set for 2 more death row inmates to be executed. I believe there are 5 or 4 scheduled for this year. So it's certainly something that has been in the news the last couple of years, certainly something that will be in the news for the rest of this year. We are happy to have with us the federal public defender, Kelley Henry. She has represented many of the people on death row. We're going to talk to her. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're not somebody who comes on a lot.
No.
You don't need to drum up business or anything like that, but why are you on now? What do you think is happening in the state, and why are you on right now?
I think it's important for Tennesseans to understand what's going on, what's happening in their name. Right now, if Tennessee is to carry out all 5 executions, the 4 others that are scheduled, we will be executing in Tennessee at a historic rate, at a rate that we haven't seen in the state since 1948. And that is juxtaposed with what's going on in the rest of the country, where the country is moving away from the use of capital punishment. And Tennessee seems to be going in the opposite direction, at least with the executions. But one of the things that I think is really important to recognize is that Tennesseans actually don't support the death penalty in terms of their verdicts. In fact, our death row is shrinking, consistent with other states. And in fact, there's no one on death row in Nashville from Davidson County other than that was sentenced during the 2000s. Mm-hmm. So Davidson County juries have not put a person on death row since 2003. That gentleman has since passed away, and they just don't have an interest in that. So I think people need to know what's going on in their name. Why
do you think this is happening now? We are seeing just lots of dates be set, and again, this week 2 more dates were set. Why do you think this is happening now?
You know, I can't really speak to the political will of those in power who make the decisions about when to ask for dates and when not to ask for dates. But certainly part of the problem has been that the state has not been able to adopt a method of execution that is humane. And you know, every time that we get a new protocol, people on my team realize that there's something wrong with that protocol, and it's our job to litigate that. And that has put us in a situation where in 2018 we had a trial here in Chancery Court in front of Chancellor Lyle, where we were able to present scientific testimony that definitively proves that the drug used in the lethal injection protocol does not work as intended. It just doesn't. Our proof was actually used by the courts in Ohio for a similar challenge, and that proof got to Governor DeWine and has resulted in Governor DeWine declaring basically a moratorium. He's saying this is not going to happen on my watch with these drugs. We lost, and so now our clients who face execution are faced with this terrible choice of having to decide lethal injection or electrocution, knowing that both option is horrifically torturous and painful.
How many states have that? I mean, it seems unusual that they get to choose how they're going to die. Is that, how unusual is that?
It is unusual. It came about around 2000, 1999, when the state wanted to move away from using the electric chair because of all of the botched electrocutions in Florida, Jesse Tafaro and Angel Davis. And so the legislature adopted lethal injection. The problem was that these guys had all been sentenced under the old law. So you can't really force the old law on, or the new law onto the old law. The compromise they came up with, I guess, was this statute that says it's your option, and if you don't exercise the option, then we're going to use lethal injection. And I believe that at the time, people believed that lethal injection was the more humane method. I don't think that anyone concocted it to be torturous. It's just that they're not doctors and neither are we. And the method that they chose, as it turns out, once we looked at it, once we did the research and talked to the experts, we realized that this is a horrible method of execution.
When I first heard the argument, I thought, well, of course, that's an argument that they're making. But then when you see person after person choosing the electric chair, they must be presented with some pretty hefty evidence that lethal injection would be very painful.
Yeah.
And you've argued that, right? You've challenged the use of the drugs used in the lethal injection protocol. But then when it comes right down to it, when they know they're going to be put to death, they are choosing to be electrocuted over the use of these drugs.
Yeah.
And so what does that say about these drugs?
Well, it tells you that our clients know that they're in for anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes of absolute torture if they choose lethal injection, and that is because the first drug just chemically cannot do what they want it to do. It cannot anesthetize you. And then you put a paralytic on top of it, and the person is literally feeling as if they're buried alive. They can't speak. They can't let the public know. They can't let the Department of Corrections know, hey, I'm awake here. And so they have that feeling of suffocation. Now we know, as a result of our litigation and the autopsies that have been performed, that's what is happening is that those drugs, as caustic as they are, start something called pulmonary edema. And so now we're feeling like we're suffocating, also feeling like we're drowning. And the autopsies show this, including the most recent one from Don Johnson, where he had hemorrhagic pulmonary edema. And they can't speak out. And then we hit them with a paralytic, or with the potassium, which is literally like liquid fire. And that's what kills them.
Is it because was there a time when there were drugs that were being used that would be more effective, that would knock somebody out, I guess, and now those drugs are off the market, companies won't let states use them? Is it because over the years the drugs used have changed? Certainly
that's a huge aspect of things. The drug companies, they're no friends of the death penalty abolitionists, as there's a lot of popular reporting of that somehow they've bowed to this ragtag group of people who oppose the death penalty. They're sweet, wonderful people, but they're not the ones that are going to move Big Pharma. Big Pharma cares about corporate policy, they care about their mission, they care about their brand, and they have exercised their First Amendment right as a corporation to say, you're not going to use our drug to kill because we want our drug to be used and seen as a drug that saves lives. And you heard our brand every time our brand is out there as being something that kills someone. So they have removed their drugs from the marketplace, is their right in a capitalist society, but then that leaves the Department of Correction with no good options. I mean, I have some suggestions for some options, but they don't want to hear what I have to say about that.
Right. What do you think is going to happen this year? I mean, how concerned are you about what has been, I guess, scheduled as far as executions? What do you think is going to happen this year?
I'm very concerned about what's going to happen this year. These are my guys, and I know them, and I know their cases, and I know the brokenness in each of their cases. I know the injustice in each of their cases, and it is concerning to me that as we have more and more executions, that there'll be fatigue. People won't pay attention. They won't know what's going on. They won't know what's happening in their name. And we have gentlemen who have serious claims of innocence. And we know that in Tennessee, for every person we've executed, for every 4 people we've executed, 1 has been exonerated. That's actually a pretty high rate. The national rate is 1 exoneration for every 9 executions. We have 1 exoneration for every 4. There are innocent people on death row. And then you have my clients who have intellectual disability. And it's illegal to execute them, but we can't get into court. And the attention doesn't get paid, light doesn't get shed on their cases until an execution date is set. So I'm very concerned, I'm very worried. At the same time, my team is prepared and ready to fight these challenges and to make sure that our clients' names are heard, their stories are told, and to shine the light on the injustice.
Is your greatest concern that they are innocent, or is it something else? I read an article, there was an article done in the Scene, it was a great article, and I want to give the name here in a minute, but I'm sorry, it was a great article in the Scene. And it said something about, you're not as focused on who done it as why done it, or something to that effect. Some of the people that I have seen executed, there wasn't much of a question about whether they were innocent or guilty. Now, certainly this is many years removed, and there was a great deal of talk about that, how they've changed in prison and that kind of thing. But is your concern that they are innocent, or is it something else?
It depends on the case, obviously. I mean, if I have an innocent client, that's a pretty big deal. But what we do what my team does is we explore who they are, what happened to them, how they got to be where they are in the system, how is it that they came to be in that terrible place where they committed the crime, if they did, and what can we learn about their lives that can shed some understanding on who they are, and also how can we explain the injustice that occurred in their trial. I will tell you that I've been a trial lawyer and I've been an appellate lawyer, and I know the difference between good lawyering and bad lawyering. And you don't end up on death row because you're the worst of the worst. You end up on death row because you have the worst of the lawyers. And you're poor. Every single case I have come across has ineffective assistance of counsel issues. Every single case has some sort of injustice that happened in trial. When you look at the statistics in Tennessee, there's a great article by lawyers Ed Miller and Brad McClain called The Death Penalty Lottery. And Ed Miller has done this study of first-degree murders in Tennessee from 1972 forward. And you can see that 2/3 of the imposed death sentences in Tennessee were overturned by federal courts because of error. The guys who get to where they are at the end of the line are the guys who fell through the cracks, who we have spent years litigating over procedural technicalities rather than the merits of their claims. People ask, why do these cases take so long? They take so long because we argue about procedural barriers. We don't argue about the truth. It becomes about process over justice once we get into post-conviction.
The article I was mentioning was Stephen Hale, so it's in the Scene. Hope everybody gets a chance to read that. So are you concerned that we are reaching a point where the public is not as concerned as they have been? Fatigue is one way to put it. How do you get people to be upset? What we're talking about, they in many cases are, they've committed horrible crimes, and there are plenty of people who will probably call in tonight and say they deserve it. They've gotten it better than their victims had it. So how do you get the public to be concerned that Tennessee is moving down this road of executing more and more people?
Well, one way is by coming on shows like this, by making sure that we do talk with people in social media and in the media about what's going on. What I have found, I've adopted Tennessee as my home state in 2000, and I think that Tennesseans are good people. They're good-hearted people. And you can look at a crime and you can say this is horrible and this person deserves every bit of torture that they get. I understand that, and I understand where that comes from at a gut level, but I know that when I sit down with people and I start to tell them my clients' stories and I talk about the horrific abuse that they suffered as a child that led them to a life of substance abuse and mental illness and brought them to a terrible place in their life, and say, let's take a look at that. And what could we, of a society, how could we have intervened earlier? How could we have stopped this? Because there was a recent survey by police chiefs, and they were asked, what are your obstacles in law enforcement? And at the top of the list, in the top 3, were mental illness and abuse. Law enforcement knows that's what's causing these crimes, and if we could take money away from what is a failed government policy that is really carrying out the political will of a very few district attorney generals. The recent statistics show that really the people executed represent 2% of the counties in this country. 98% of the counties aren't executing people, which is also why some people don't care, because it's not in their backyard. But we should care because it's their money. Mm-hmm. It's taxpayer money, and it's being done in their name. and it's really just a waste.
When a case comes to you, so you said the majority, if you look at people on death row that are about to be executed, one thing they have in common is, you said, a bad attorney.
Right.
They didn't get good attorneys, good representation. They were poor.
Right.
How does the case come to you? So you obviously didn't represent them in that first phase. You represent them at what point?
I represent them basically at the last stage. So that we talk about there being a 3-tier process. So there's the trial level, there's state post-conviction, and then there's federal habeas. That's where my team comes in. And we are appointed by statute. There's a statute called 28 U.S.C. 2254 that gives these men the opportunity to file a petition for writ of habeas corpus, and that is to carry out, the U.S. Constitution that says the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended. And then Congress, because the death penalty is so final, has passed a statute under the Criminal Justice Act which says that every person who is subject to a sentence of death is entitled to the appointment of counsel once they reach that federal habeas level. In about 1995, units like mine were developed because we're more cost effective, we specialize, and there are about 22 of us across the country now, and all we do is represent men during this last phase. So whether they receive clemency, whether we get their conviction set aside, or whether they're executed, we're their last lawyers.
I can't think of a more difficult job. You are getting these cases where the guilt part is really not being argued that much. You're getting that, like you said, the final phase, and there's so much at stake. And so often it might seem like you're not successful and your client is executed.
Yeah.
How difficult is it to do this job?
It is both difficult, and yet I can't see myself ever doing anything else. It is rewarding to tell my client stories. They put so much trust in us. They say, I say to them, give me your pain, give me your shame, and I'm going to hold on to it, and I'm going to take care of it, and I'm going to tell your story in a way that is respectful of you and your family and everyone else. And that's a great gift for someone to trust me and to trust my team in that way. And telling their stories, whether we win or we lose, I can't control the courts, I can't control laws that change. All I can control is the work that I put into it, the work my team puts into it. And if we're telling their story and sticking up for them, then even if they're executed, I can the next day hold my head high and say, I did everything I could, I spoke truth to power, and I gave that person, my client, dignity and love and peace. And to tell you the truth, often they're the ones giving me the dignity and the love and the peace at the end.
Really?
Yeah.
You have called people and said at the last minute, your execution has stayed, right?
Yeah.
You've called and said that. Have you also delivered, it's not stayed?
Yeah.
And so you're the person who does that?
Yeah.
So that's crazy. All right, so we're now going to take a break. We've kind of set the table, and we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts? I'm sure you have plenty of thoughts. There's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. We'll be back right after this.